Hello again. Today I'm here with Dave Bewley, who was the sound designer for PI. And I guess probably the best place to start would be just finding a little bit about your background and how you got into sound work.
Well, oddly enough, I got into sound work through being in a sketch comedy troupe.
Okay.
We were in Los Angeles, and we went to a festival, and some people liked our show and gave us a radio show that we did for 1 year, and we had never done any just pure audio sketches before. It's always been like stage or film.
Okay.
And so they just threw 4 or 5 Pro Tools rigs at us, and none of us knew how to use it, and I was sort of the one who took to it.
Okay.
And really liked it. And so when we split up a while later, about a year later, that's what I decided to keep doing. So I went to school to sort of, I'd sort of figured it out on my own, but then I went to school to learn all the technical tricks.
Okay.
And,
I didn't know that, actually. I mean, I know we've worked together quite a bit, but I thought that you had done this kind of as a separate thing. I know you do sketch comedy as well, but I didn't realize that was such a big part of how you had learned.
Yeah,
so
it sort of forced me into it a little bit.
So especially for something like PI, where it's obviously comedy, there's no dialogue, did you find that helped a little bit, having a comedy background? Did that really figure in much to the sound design, just in terms of...
Yeah, absolutely. Especially with a project like this, I mean, it's all about the comedy of it, and comedy is all about timing.
Yeah.
So, even with just sound effects and everything, a millisecond can make a difference in how the audience reacts and everything. So, I definitely think that it helps out.
Very, very cool. So you started off doing that, and then for the last several years, you've been doing a lot of commercials and TV shows and movies and a wide variety of other stuff. Is there anything that particular you'd want to talk about in terms of that, like other stuff you've been doing and sort of what your background is professionally, sound design wise?
Well, mostly the studio where I work, most of what we do is it's all post production. Mostly it's radio and television commercials. I would say mostly radio commercials, which is all audio. There's no picture or anything to deal with. And so so it's a lot of sound design, a lot of VO recording and music, and just taking all of that and making it sound like a real radio commercial. Yeah,
very cool. And by the way, I should mention that the company is 501 Audio. Yep. And I have to say, I've worked with these guys for many years. I actually worked at the sister company for a while, and I just wanted to give a shout out because they've been awesome through this whole process.
Thank you.
Okay, so let's kind of move over into more of this specific film's realm a little bit. So I hand over a video file, at which point you kind of have little to no audio. What's the typical process for getting started on doing the sound?
It's pulling in whatever audio you've got, anything that you've layered in Final Cut. I'm not sure what you edited on, but whatever pulling that in and just kind of seeing where it's at, organizing it in Pro Tools the way that I like to have things organized. All the ADR together, or actually, I guess it didn't have any ADR originally, but all the effects together and sort of organized by what sound is what. And then, music separated out there, and just kind of seeing where we are, listening through it, and seeing where those holes are that, could use something else a little, just to flesh it out a little bit. That's basically where it is, and I'll go through and add the effects. Spend forever searching through our ridiculously large vault of sound effects and seeing which ones are best.
Yeah.
And then if we don't have a sound effect, which happened in this case a lot, especially with the case, like when the case lands in the street, or a lot of the motion with the case, we just didn't have any sounds that fit for that. So I actually borrowed a case of poker chips from Matt Naylor at 501 Post, and pulled that into the booth and did some Foley work like that. We don't do a lot of Foley work, so it was a lot of fun to be able to do that.
And you mentioned that you pull a lot of the stuff from the library. Is that I guess in terms of this project, how much would you say was recorded originally for this project, and how much more was libraries and stuff that you already had?
I would say it's mostly libraries. All the explosions and stuff like that. It was a lot of the more detail sound that we recorded ourselves. A lot of the cloth movement, little sounds of the case, very specific things that aren't as general, I guess.
Right.
So, but footsteps, explosions, stuff like that, which is really, kind of the bulk of this. It's so actiony.
Right.
So I would say it's probably 80% kind of library stuff, and then 20% is us having to come up with it on our own.
Yeah.
In the booth.
Well, and I know since you were just talking about footsteps in the cloth, this project was also very different than a lot of the other ones that you've done because it was animation, which means that there was no sound to start off with. There wasn't any Foley. There wasn't any, did you find that more entertaining? Was that a lot more fun to work on? Was that pretty difficult to have to put in every single sound from scratch?
Well, at first it seemed a little daunting just because, anything that I've done before with a lot of sound design is typically TV, but it's, video recorded, and it will come with the on-camera action and everything, and I'll just sort of embellish and, make things a little bigger. But, yeah, like with this, with absolutely nothing to start with.
Yeah.
At first it was like, whoa. It's only 6 minutes.
Yeah.
But when you get down to it, everything that's going on, it's just like, whoa. That's
a
lot of stuff we got to put together. But it came together.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's just so many tracks and just so many different things that you have to think about. And I suppose probably another maybe similar thing that you run into as well is, do you ever find yourself with something like this where you've got so many tracks and so many different sound effects that you've added where it starts to get a little messy? And just in terms of there's too many sound effects going on, or, you spend so much time getting that footstep in there just right, and then it comes down to mix time, and you just have to cut it out because it just doesn't fit into the whole flow of the...
Yeah, absolutely. That happened quite a bit. If you look at my session, you can see a lot of sound effects in there that are gray, which means they're muted, which is stuff that I added in as I was building it.
Right.
But then as, all the layers started on top of it, you realize that, okay, you're not even hearing that.
Right.
And so, let's mute that. So, you do spend some time finding stuff that eventually you're going to let go of because something else needs to be a little more prominent or whatever.
Right.
But
you want to put it all in there so that you have it and it doesn't come down to mix time and then you're missing something. But
right.
You can always whittle it down or cut it out completely if you have to. So
whatever works in the end.
Exactly. Well, so what we've been talking about so far is a lot of the mechanics of it, I'd guess. Just, like getting sounds in, figuring out what you're going to use for them. On the more creative side, there's a lot that sound adds both to the comedy and the atmosphere and the world around you. I know in this case we had two specific worlds, which was the outside world and then inside the briefcase. Could you talk a little? And actually, I should mention that we're recording this podcast almost a year to the day after you finished the previous one, so I know some of this stuff might not be the freshest. But do you remember much about sort of creating those two different environment soundscapes and some of the differences you put in them to sort of create some emotional tension between them? Or
from the beginning I wanted inside of the case, it's such a small little case, I wanted that to sound a lot more claustrophobic. So most of the sound effects in that are more mono. They're not as spread left and right, so to give it less of an expansive feel. Whereas outside when we're in the street, you can hear, the street noise. You hear people occasionally, and it's a lot more left and right, which just gives that impression of just more space.
Right.
But that was the main difference between the two. And on the 5.1 mix, which I just finished, that's even more pronounced because I've got more speakers to deal with. And when we're in the case, it's literally just the center speaker is the only thing that has any sound coming out of it.
Yeah.
And then there are a few scenes where it cuts back and forth, and when you cut back outside, you've got street ambience, city ambience in all five speakers actually. Yeah. So just trying to give that sort of difference in feeling that it's real subtle, but you notice it without thinking about noticing it, I guess.
Yeah, well, and it's one of those things where it has to, everything sort of adds up, all those little details add up to be something that the audience hopefully won't consciously realize, but will pick up on subliminally, and it'll enhance what you're trying to do with a shot, which exactly. I suppose that's probably one of the toughest things to do with sound, because you never really want the audience to pay attention to the sound.
Right.
Yeah. That's always it's a really tough boat to walk. It always amazes me when, find that line of exactly how.
You want them to be able to hear everything, but you don't want anything to stand out or to jar them or to pull them away from it.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. Well, I just wanted to sort of reiterate what you had just said about specifically the inside the briefcase versus outside, and I never realized that you had used that trick in terms of making it mono inside the briefcase. What I also noticed, though, was that there was a pretty significant volume change, which in many ways is hilarious, and I think it adds a lot of humor to that scene, just because you're in the big, expansive street view, lots of stuff, and then inside suddenly it gets really quiet and it's just mechanical. I know you used a lot of like sound and mechanical sound effects in there.
Yeah,
just
a lot of little hum. I kind of wanted it. I wanted it to sound like one of those just giant like computer rooms where it's just databases and hard drives, and it just has that sort of hum.
Yeah.
So yeah,
to make it feel very different. So, well, another thing that this had that was a bit more unique to some of the stuff that you've done is pretty big action sequences, lots of explosions, lots of. Could you talk about sort of that, and also how that figures into the music? Because I know that this also had a pretty big score during those big action sections. So how do you work those sound effects in, and how do they play off and against the score? And
well, it's all about balance, really. I mean, usually when I'm doing the original, my first go at the sound design, I'll just completely mute the music, just so I can just focus on the sound, and then get it to where I like it, and then add the music in, and then that's when I'll go in and just sort of change the relative level between the two.
Okay.
I know that was one thing that you talked about when you came in after I'd done my initial pass, that you kind of wanted the music to be a driving force in it.
Yeah.
So we played a lot with the levels on that, especially the sequence when he's flying through the air after the rocket, because I had a lot more sound in there.
That's right. I remember
whenever
that
you
now.
came in,
yeah,
a lot more wind. It was very noisy and loud, and then we sort of pulled that back and let the music drive it a little more. There's still a lot of wind sound and stuff, but I mean, compared to what there was,
right. Well, but that's another case where it just goes to show, like, all those sounds are in there, and if we turned off the music track, you'd still be able to hear all that stuff going on inside the mix. It's just been brought down to a point where it's not as intrusive. So, yeah, well, that's awesome. I'm trying to think if there were any other sort of big questions that I had. Do you have anything specific that you kind of wanted to talk about, or some specific things that you remember about the project that were different, or just sort of pretty...
Well, we sort of touched on all of them. I mean, it was a lot of fun for me because, you know, like I said, most of what I do is radio and television commercials, which isn't horribly creative. I mean, a lot of them will allow a little bit of creativity here and there, but to just be handed something like this and it's just, all right, go. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah. Well, in fact, I do remember one other thing that we didn't mention on, because you also were the voice of Walter.
Yes.
So you had, whenever you heard Walter grunt or groan or make some weird noise, that was Dave.
That was me.
Just hitting
and
yourself
you were
in
the pigeon. So.
Oh well, yeah, I did the pigeon. So yes, this was the entire acting cast of voice cast at least. But yeah, and I suppose that's always something very different as well, because we never really planned to have those sound effects in there. I think that was actually one of my biggest mistakes, just in terms of like how I went about sort of prepping things for the sound design, is that I didn't think of like, oh, Walter needs to groan here or grunt. Did that become an issue where trying to squeeze them in and noticing like, oh, the mouth isn't really moving quite the way it should for something like that? Or
no, I don't think it really became an issue. I mean, I remember when we recorded it, I recorded a lot more than ended up in there. I mean, we pretty much covered every motion that Walter made, and then we sort of went through and found the ones that are like, okay, this one's viable here, you know. But yeah, no, it wasn't really an issue.
Okay, yeah, no, that was funny. That was one of the notes that I made to myself, is that I wish I had kind of planned that out and made more space for some of the Walter vocalizations, even if they're not words, to sort of carry a bit more of the sound design. But
I like it. I mean, they're in there very subtly. There are some that you don't notice unless you kind of look for them, or know that they're there and listen for them. But I like that. I think it adds to the believability of it.
Yeah,
so.
Yeah. Well, fantastic. Well, if you don't have anything else that you want to add, I think that was great. So thanks so much for taking the time to talk with us about this, Dave.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Thanks, man.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think this is a perfect time to just say a huge thank you to all of the people who helped out with Pigeon Impossible. There were so many people who put in a lot of time and effort into this project. All the musicians, the CG guys, the story people. I just can't say thank you enough. Working on this project has been a dream come true, and I'm so glad that I've gotten the opportunity to share, you know, some of the behind-the-scenes processes with all of you guys. So, like I said, hopefully you found them useful, and that I will get a chance to talk to you again in the future about another project. Thanks for listening.